able to perform miracles and attract miracles into your life, you have to purify this temple that you live in. And your temple, the temple that you live in, is something that was intended into this universe with perfection. And any energy that comes into it, like yesterday I demonstrated the impact of aspartame and saccharin on the body. In 1,000 out of 1,000 cases in the eye of the eye, Hawkins describes how it doesn't make any difference whether the person knows or doesn't know. Whenever you put that artificial substance into your body, you are weakening your body. And letting go of addictions and letting go of the belief that these are things that have more power over you than you have to let go of them is one of the energy levels below that calibrates below 200. It isn't spirituality in this presentation here today is not about what church you attend and what scriptures you read. It's about how you stay connected to the perfection from which you were intended in the very first place. And I'd like you to really understand that. And when you do, you'll understand that anything that you do that is self-defeating to this temple, as the Sufis used to say, if you don't have a temple in your heart, you'll never find your heart in a temple. And it's about having a temple in your heart. It's about staying connected. And when you do, exercise becomes a regular part of your life. It's a spiritual experience. The foods that you eat become a spiritual experience. The music that you listen to becomes a spiritual experience. The books that you allow into your home, the programs that you allow to be on your television set, the kinds of ideas that you read in newspapers. So it's this force and counterforce thing. Now, as individuals, we understand when the World Trade Center was hit, our first impact, our first inclination was to be kind. What can we do? And you saw people donating blood. We had more blood donated in the first few hours after that than they had to tell people to stop doing it. They had people getting into their fire trucks in Iowa and driving them all the way to Manhattan. They had people going into burning buildings and taking people out. Our whole sense of compassion, because compassion is one of the highest energy levels that you can reach. It calibrates around 470. That when you have compassion in your heart for those who are operating or living at lower levels. And I remember the story that I heard shortly after the World Trade Center disaster, and it was of grandfather talking to his grandson. And the grandson was looking up at his grandpa, and his grandpa said, he said, I feel as if I have two wolves barking inside of me. He said, the first wolf is filled with anger and hatred and bitterness and mostly revenge. And then he said, I have a second wolf barking inside of me who is filled with love and kindness and compassion and even forgiveness. And the grandson looked up at his grandpa and said, which wolf do you think will win, Grandpa? And his grandfather responded, whichever one I feed. And we have to look at what we feed internally in ourselves. When Einstein reminded us that until we come up with an alternative to using force as a way of resolving our disputes, we are doomed as a people to destroy ourselves. We'll destroy ourselves. The weapons that we have put aside in order to resolve our disputes cannot even be used. Because if we explode them and the wind changes, it blows back on us the very thing that we are attempting to put onto our enemies.
Here's a quote from Marcus Aurelius, the famous Roman emperor. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Take care that you entertain no notions unsuitable to virtue and reasonable nature. And here's Mother Teresa. God does not command that we do great things, only little things with great love. There are no justified resentments. You hear people say this all the time. I have a right to be upset because of the way I've been treated. I have a right to be angry, hurt, depressed, sad, and resentful. Learning to avoid this kind of thinking is one of my top 10 secrets for living a life of inner peace, success, and happiness. Anytime you're filled with resentment, you're turning the controls of your emotional life over to others to manipulate. I became aware of how powerful this lesson was many years ago while sitting in on a meeting of 12 people who were in a recovery group for alcoholism and drug addiction. All 12 of those people were accustomed to blaming others for their weaknesses, using almost any excuse as a rationale for returning to their self-defeating ways. On a poster hanging in the room were these words, "In this group, there are no justified resentments." Regardless of what anyone would say to another group member, no matter how confrontational or ugly the accusations, each person was reminded that there are no justified resentments. You may need to consider whom you resent before you make your own choice about whether this is useful for you. Resentments give you an excuse to return to your old ways. This is what got you there in the first place. Why resentments are there? You may be familiar with a popular television show called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? If the contestant answers 15 multiple-choice questions, he or she wins $1 million. Starting with a $100 question, the person in the hot seat answers 5 questions until reaching the $1,000 level. At this point, the person is guaranteed to leave with something. Then the questions increase in difficulty. If the contestant reaches $32,000, again there's a guarantee of leaving with that amount. So there are 2 crucial levels to attain. The $1,000 level, which is achieved by answering 5 relatively simple questions, and the $32,000 level, which involves 5 increasingly difficult questions. I've just related details about this TV program to present the idea of the 2 levels that you must achieve in order to have a chance at the highest $1 million level of awareness. The $1,000 level is one in which you can learn to leave blame behind in your life. If you don't do so, you're going to go home with nothing. Removing blame means never assigning responsibility to anyone for what you're experiencing. It means that you're willing to say, I may not understand why I feel this way, why I have this illness, why I've been victimized, or why I had this accident, but I am willing to say without any guilt or resentment that I own it, I live with it, and I am responsible for having it in my life. Why do this? If you take responsibility for having it, then at least you have a chance to also take responsibility for removing it or learning from it. If you're in some small way, perhaps unknown, responsible for that migraine headache or that depressed feeling, then you can go to work to remove it or discover what its message is for you. If, on the other hand, someone or something else is responsible in your mind, then of course you'll have to wait until they change for you to get better, and that is unlikely to occur. So at the $1,000 level, blame has to go. Otherwise, you go home with nothing and are unable to participate at the higher levels. You must be willing to pass a new test at the second critical level, the $32,000 question, which is the final obstacle you must face in order to move into the more exalted realm of self-actualization and higher consciousness, the $1 million spiritual level, if you will. At this level, you must be willing to send the higher, faster energies of love, peace, joy, forgiveness, and kindness as your response to whatever comes your way. This is the start of the uncrowded extra mile, where you have only one love to give away. Someone says something to you that you find offensive, and rather than opting for resentment, you are able to depersonalize what you've just heard and respond with kindness. You would rather be right than kind. You have no need to make others wrong or to retaliate when you've been wronged. You do this for yourself. There's a Chinese proverb, if you're going to pursue revenge, you'd better dig 2 graves. Your resentments will destroy you. They are low energies. And along the extra mile, you'll only meet others who have fully grasped this concept. The ones who haven't made it to this level are all back with the crowd who went out of the game long ago on an easier question, and most are still back there wondering why they keep going home with nothing. But I can assure you that they continue to blame others for their emptiness. First, you have to get past blame. Then you have to learn to send love to all rather than anger and resentment. The story is told of the enlightened master who always responded to outbursts of criticism, judgment, and ridicule with love, kindness, and peace. One of his devotees asked him how he could possibly be so kind and peaceful in the face of such disparaging invective. His response to the devotee was this question: if someone offers you a gift, and you do not accept that gift, to whom does the gift belong? The answer leads us to the extra mile. Ask yourself, why would I allow something that belongs to someone else to be a source of my resentment? As the title of a popular book says, What you think of me is none of my business.
The first pathway is called discipline. All right, so this is like you have to train the body. Right? So you have to go to practice.
Yes.
Right? The second, now we're not talking about education here, we're talking about mastery. The second pathway is called wisdom, and that is the application of the mind to what you've trained yourself to do. So if you're going out to learn how to shoot a basket, or to hit a tennis ball, or to make a lemon meringue pie, or dance the Macarena, or anything, the first thing you do is you train your body, you get it in shape, and the second thing you do is you apply wisdom, the mind, to it. Right? Now this is what we mean by education. So that if we send our children off to school, we say to them, get some discipline and use your head. And basically you've got an education.
Yes.
But that's not mastery. The top two levels of mastery include, the third one's called unconditional love. I watched Pavarotti sing at one of the three tenors, Civil Witches concert.
Yes.
42,000 of us at a football stadium in
Wow.
Florida.
Yeah.
And they had a screen on him, Michael, that was 30 feet high. That's 3 stories high, and they showed a close-up of him. Now, this is a man, how many times has he sang O Sole Mio in Italian, all right? There's nobody in the stadium understands Italian, but it doesn't matter. They show a close-up on his face on this 30-foot screen, and he is in bliss. He's just in bliss. And I said to my wife, who was sitting next to me, I said, honey, this guy has obviously gone to practice. I mean, you've got to practice to be the best in the world. And he's also, obviously, he's got great wisdom. He has studied. But that's not what makes him the greatest tenor in the world. I said, look at the love. Oh, solo me. I mean, he was just, every fiber of him was involved in this. He was he was in love with what he was doing. And he wasn't selling us the song, he was selling us the love.
Yes.
That's the third pathway. But the highest pathway, what we really call mastery, is what we call surrender, which is when you get to that place where you realize that this is not you who's doing any of this, that you're not this body, this is not your home, this is not you that's doing it. There's something that you're connecting to called spirit, or consciousness, or higher awareness, and you're allowing God, I guess, if you will, to flow through you and send that out into the world. That's what the highest of them are. I mean, Michael Jordan says, I don't know how I do that, I just surrender.
Yes.
That whole idea of being able to get your ego out of the way. I was just asked the question in South Africa, but they were interviewing me, one of the newspapers there, and the woman hit me with this question. She said, what's been the greatest accomplishment of your life? And my ego started really going into, high gear. And I was thinking about, how many books I'd written, how many times I'd appeared on the Tonight Show, or, where I was on bestseller lists and all of this. I would I wasn't saying a word. I was just sort of rattling all of these things off that my ego wanted to say. And then finally it hit me, and I said to the woman, I think the greatest accomplishment of my life has been my ability to tame my ego, and to no longer see myself as what I have and what I do and what other people think of me. I'm not my possessions. I'm not my accomplishments. I'm not my reputation. I've been able to see myself as a spiritual being, if you will, having that human experience. And that is involved with letting go. As they say in that recovery movement, you let go and you let God. And that may sound trite, but it's really one of the great secrets to being able to attract and manifest into your life. One of the people that I selected in Wisdom of the Ages or selected me, was this man who we don't even know when he was born or when he lived. His name was Patanjali. I'm sure you're familiar with Patanjali. The original Yoga Sutras. Yes. And his book, How to Know God.
Yes.
And
wonderful translation by Swami Prabhavananda and Christopher Isherwood.
Yes, I have that.
Yeah, it's a great translation of that.
Yes. It's just, every page. I've never read a book that I have. When I read it, I read a page or two, and I set it down, and I can't wait to get back to it. But I don't want to read it because I'm afraid it's going to end. Okay, that's how I feel about that book.
Right. Because
there's so much masterful kinds of experiences and aphorisms in there that we can apply, and really, really reach these miraculous levels. Anyway, one of the passages that I used from Patanjali was about this concept called inspiration, which is really what we're talking about here, because the word inspiration, of course, comes from in spirit. And the word information comes from inform. So this is the age of information
And there's no shortage of information on this planet, with a computer chip that can put the name and address of everybody in the United States on it, and it's just the size of your thumbnail. We've got plenty of information.
Yes.
But what we have is a spiritual deficit, a deficit of spirit. So Patanjali talked about becoming inspired as a source of, and this is what he said. He said, when you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all of your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations, your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new and a great and a wonderful world. And then he had this alarming thing to say. I laminated this and carried it with me. He said, dormant forces, faculties, and talents come alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. And all you have to do is become inspired, that is, move into the world of spirit. And once we do that, once we leave the form, once we leave the ego, once we leave the idea that I am what I have and what I do and my reputation, what others think of me, and begin to see ourselves as the beloved, as connected to rather than separate from God, and allow that higher spiritual awareness to flow into our lives. I think that's what we mean when we say surrender, when we say let go. I know when I'm writing, if I let go, my writing is blissful and easy. When I struggle with it and I try to think about the right word and so on, I get stuck. Same in an interview, or the same in when I'm speaking on stage, or whatever. When I let go, it's the old aphorism: when the student is ready,
Yes.
The teachers appear.
In reading the aphorisms of Patanjali, he was talking, now you have to remember, we're talking about before the Middle Ages, which were called the Dark Ages. And here was Patanjali writing about the ability to be able to do absolutely miraculous things. The ability to be able to be in more than one place at the same time. The ability to be able to be in the presence of another human being and raise your energy to such a level that you could literally, by your presence alone, just heal that person. The ability to be able to transcend things like diseases. The ability to be able to have the gift of fish and loaves. To just live at such a level of consciousness that anything you placed your attention on instantaneously, you had the capacity and the power to be able to make that realization for you. The book is called How to Know God. Now, it's not called How to Know About God. It's not called How to Believe in God. It's called How to Know God. And how to know God means making conscious contact with God. It's the only way you can know anything. So here are the 5 aphorisms. The first is called, the central act of ignorance is false identification. The central act of ignorance is called false identification. What does Patanjali mean by false identification? And what does he mean by ignorance? Ignorance is not to be assumed to mean that you are uninformed. It means that you are identifying yourself as a human being with your body and your possessions and this material world. And the central act of that ignorance is the identification falsely with this world of the changing. But beyond the world of the changing is the changeless world. And once you start to identify yourself there and know that this is who you are, know it, like you're listening right now and you're watching, and the energy that is coming into you is coming through your eyes and ears and senses. And it is only your eyes and your ears and your senses that take this energy and twist it into something called evil or problems. It comes into your eyes, these energies, and into your ears, if it could be examined just before it hits your eyes, and just before it reaches your ears, and we could examine it very carefully, you would find that the scientists would say, no, there's no problems in that energy. There's no evil in that energy. Nope, it's just energy. It's just a frequency, it's vibrating at a certain speed. But as soon as it hits your senses, and you begin to interpret it, problems begin to show up in your life. But the energy itself contains no problems. It's just energy. That's proper identification according to Patanjali. That's the first aphorism. The second aphorism sounds like this. The mind of the truly illumined, said Patanjali, is calm, because the peace of God within all things is known, even within the appearance of misery and disease. Even within the appearance of misery and disease. The mind of the truly illumined is always calm. And the mind of the truly illumined understands that the peace of God is in all things. You are in this world, but what? You are not of this world. That is not who you are. You are not of this world, even though you're in it. So you're filling out the forms, you send in your money to the IRS, and you stop at the red lights, and you obey the laws, and you follow the rules, that is, most of them, which seem to make sense, and the ones that don't, you're able to ignore, which you have to, otherwise we'll never have any growth. The third aphorism is quite simple, and it's one that's most troubling to many people in the West. Patanjali said, sin is non-existent. Sin is non-existent. There are only obstacles to one's ultimate union with God. You do not sin. When you behave toward another person in a harmful way, when you steal from another person, when you violate any of the commandments or whatever, you have not sinned. You have created an obstacle to your union with God. You see, the reason we don't want to put sin in there, according to Patanjali, is because it creates shame and guilt. Shame computes the absolute lowest in whether you're going to be strong or weak in your life. Shame is the lowest frequency emotion that is possible. It only computes at 25 on a scale of 1 to 1,000. The fourth aphorism that leads us into a spiritual solution to every problem sounds like this. And these last two are the ones that I absolutely resonate to and love the most. The person who is steadfast in his abstention from falsehood has the power to obtain for himself and others the fruits of good deeds without having to perform the deeds themselves. Steadfast in abstaining from means that you never waver and you never have thoughts of falsehood, that is, identifying yourself as a material being rather than a spiritual being. And when you become steadfast in that, when you say to someone, God blesses you, they are blessed by your presence when you have that kind of consciousness. And you present yourself to someone and you are absolutely steadfast in abstention from falsehood. And in the presence of such a person, healing takes place. And blessing takes place. And the fifth aphorism, my favorite of all, says, when a person is steadfast in his abstention from harming others, then all living creatures will cease to feel enmity in his or her presence. So when you become steadfast in your abstention from ever having a thought of harm directing at other people, and that's how you walk through the world, butterflies will land on your shoulder. Birds will not be afraid of you. Little dogs, or even vicious dogs, will become domesticated by being in your presence. All living creatures, babies, will goo-goo and come to you. You know people like this, don't you? And what you'll do is set into motion these dormant forces, which will collaborate with you because you're in spirit rather than in form.